Welcome to Manny's TV Talk, where we will talk about all of our favorite reality TV shows and news surrounding them. Grab a snack, a drink, and get comfortable because this starts now. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. As I'm sure by now, you've probably heard of the new documentary on ID called Quiet on Set: The Dark Side of Kids TV. So let's get right into it. Let's talk about this.
Was like being in an abusive relationship.
Dan's treatment of people on his shows was an open secret.
So my lawyer filed complaints, gender discrimination, hostile work environment.
So y'all already know that I love my documentaries. I love true crime. And I also was a big fan of kids TV when I was a kid. Now here's the thing though. I didn't really watch Nickelodeon. So I was born in 2003. So by the time I was kind of old enough to watch a little bit older kids TV shows, I used to watch Disney Channel. So I'm more of a Disney Channel kid, but I will say there was a show on Nickelodeon that I loved so much, which was Victorious, with Victoria Justice, Ariana Grande, and it was like a bunch of kids that used to go to this talented high school, and it used to be just a really, I loved it when I was a kid. However, I always now that after seeing this documentary, I was telling my sister that now that I think about it, the show Victoria's, from what I can remember, it always had inappropriate jokes. It always was a little edgy, and again, maybe at the time I didn't think much of it because I too was kind of growing up, and those kids in the show at the time were like kind of teenagers, so they were growing up. But you guys, this documentary was shocking. It was revealing. It was revolting even. So let's get started into this documentary. So the first episode really talks about Nickelodeon and how impactful it was, specifically in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. So again, I wouldn't have been watching at that time, but the documentary did a good job in kind of putting into perspective how massive and how popular the network was at the time, and it was kind of introducing something else to kids that wasn't just your traditional cartoons. So we're introduced to Dan Schneider. Now I knew him again from Victorious, and I also knew that he had produced iCarly, which at the time was also an incredibly popular show, and so was Sam and Cat. So I kind of knew of him by that, but we got to know a little bit more about Dan Schneider. So Dan himself was a bit of an actor when he was growing up, and he was casted as sort of like the stereotypical fat guy who was like, just kind of funny, just kind of the sidelines. However, Dan was always problematic because even before he became an actor, he was already caught lying on newspapers saying that he went to Harvard when he in fact never attended the university. So yeah, but again, that's what he kind of basically was, a sideline character, nothing too exciting, but it was almost as if he really wanted to escape this stereotypical role and really showcase himself as a great writer, producer, and executive of a TV show. So his first mega hit that truly put him on the map was the show called All That. Now, All That was a massive hit on Nickelodeon, and it had stars that even to this day we know of, such as Amanda Bynes, Kenan Thompson, and we also in the documentary had a couple of the stars that were on the show, including a girl named Katrina Johnson. So this show was great. It was popular, it was fun, it was entertaining, people were loving it, but there was a dark side to all of this. So in the first episode, we're introduced to two female writers that were hired for the show. One's name is Christy, and the other one's name is Jenny. Now, this was a very hostile and sexist environment because from the very beginning, Dan told these two ladies that they were going to have to split their salary. So they were not going to be paid as a normal man would. It would be one salary split in between the two of them. Now, these two women were very talented. They had a lot of good material, so that's why Dan kept them. But very early on, people could tell that there was something very odd about Dan Schneider. He had a lot of weird sexual innuendos, imagery. One thing that is very, very prevalent in a lot of the clips that they showed is that they very, very much so are always referring to somebody getting splashed in the face, and of course that's sort of simulating some sort of ejaculation, and they had a lot of scenes where they had like the girls like be receiving some sort of water through their mouths, or just yeah, just weird things. For example, we had one actor, his name is Brian Hearn, and he recalls an experience when he was on the show where Dan wanted him to be like what he called a fetus rapper. So like the youngest rapper ever to be born, and he remembers them putting him in this like nude bodysuit, but it honestly sort of resembled a penis and testicles. Like that's what it looked like. And then they would have like these jokes where like he would sneeze, and like the woman that was at the receiving end would get splashed by that. So just stuff like that that were it was just weird and disgusting. And by the way, there was also pretty much racism, because this guy that I just talked about, he also talked about how Dan Schneider was like kind of obsessed with the children that used to work on the show, but he never really saw any of this treatment. He was always kind of getting the side eye. They even mentioned a scene where they made where his character at the time was like selling cookies, but they sort of made it in a way as if he were a drug dealer. So very problematic. But to go back to Dan Schneider and his weird things, he even had a character who her name was Penelope Taint. Now her last name is something really gross that I don't even want to talk about. If y'all want to know what that is, just Google it. But just know it's a body part, and it refers to something very not appropriate at all. So things like that, people were not allowed to question it. We are explained this by the two female writers, because Dan was the boss. He ran everything. Nobody could do anything to him. They even go into detail about how he would make them do weird stuff. So, for example, he would email them and say, "Scream, I'm an idiot." So they would have to say, "I'm an idiot." Like they would have to scream those things because they felt like they had to. And of course, it got worse and worse. It really was humiliating for them to do it, but they felt like they had no other option. He would also make them do weird things, such as, for one of the ladies, he said, "I'll give you $300 if you can chuck this pint of ice cream in 2 minutes." And, they needed money because they were not doing that well. They were splitting a whole salary, so they would do it. And they would do it over and over again, and it got to the point where he would not pay them. And one of them, she asked him, so, and it was like in a joking way, because she had done another little bet that he promised her, and she kind of jokingly said, "Oh, I'm just gonna add it to the tab, because you haven't paid me for the other ones." And he got so mad. He said, "Don't you ever dare and make it seem like I don't go through with my promises," even though he had it. So anyway, these two ladies continue to do their thing. They're doing their show. Now Christy, because again, they had to write jokes for these characters, she did some joke about when she was in high school. And then Dan Schneider told her in front of everyone to please say that joke again, but bend over the table and pretend that she was being, the word starts with S and it ends with mised. Yup. And that was extreme. And she did it. Unfortunately, she did it. She didn't. It just was a lot. Like, everyone was just like looking at her. And the other lady, Jenny, told us how she thought that was like the worst thing she's ever seen in a professional work environment. But going back to Christy, after she did that, she was actually fired because she was she called out 2 times. I guess she was sick twice, so they fired her. Another thing is that they found out that there was legally a rule that you had to be paid equally, everybody, regardless of their gender. So Jenny goes and she tells the higher uppers about this ethical violation, and they talk to Dan Schneider about it, that he cannot do that. And then he finds out, he doesn't know who said it, but he goes to Jenny and says, "If I find out that you're the one who did this, you're going to be done. You're never going to work again." So that happened. But because Christy had already been fired, Jenny did not want to be the only woman working there. She just did not think it was going to be okay for her. It was already bad enough them being the only 2 women. Being the only woman was going to be a no at all. So she quit because she just couldn't do it. Now, Oh, and just a quick example, because she did spend just a little bit working there after Jenny was fired, but just to show you how bad it was, one time they were at a meeting, right? With all like the writers and stuff. Dan turns to Jenny and says, "Didn't you tell me one time you had phone sex?" And Jenny's just like, "No, like what are you talking? No, I never said that. What are you talking about?" So that's it. Just puts in perspective how horrible it was. So once she left, she filed a lawsuit against the network. She sued Dan and all of them. She was claiming gender discrimination, hostile work environment. And here's the thing: they settled. So they didn't go into much detail. I'm sure she got paid some bit, but it just puts in perspective how when you were to go against Stan, people were so scared because he would blackball you. That's how bad it was. But anyway, so at this time, all that is becoming, again, like I said, was super successful. Then Dan Schneider finds his golden ticket. Amanda Bynes. Amanda Bynes was the golden child of Nickelodeon, and her stardom, honestly, it was really impressive how quick and how massively she grew. So they got the Amanda show, the Amanda Bynes show began on Nickelodeon in 1999. So Dan, again, this was like his golden girl, and even through like the shows, the Amanda Bynes show, all that, Dan even had his own presence on the show. Like, for example, the kids would like on the episodes, they would like get a call from him and be like, "Oh, well, we gotta do what Dan says." Or, for example, they showed one time where Amanda was on a hot tub with Dan there. Keep in mind, she's still a child, so the whole thing is disgusting. It's so unbelievable how at the time this was allowed to happen, and like it again, I know it was the 90s and stuff, but I'm just like, damn, did parents really not know? I'm sure they did, but that's like, how do you not see there's a grown ass oversized obese 40-year-old man in a hot tub with a 13-year-old girl? Like, unbelievable. But anyway, if you thought this could get any worse, I mean, this couldn't get any worse. Well, it can, and it gets 10 times worse. So, Dan Schneider, he was definitely grooming these children, putting these jokes. He never actually touch them, if you get what I'm saying. However, there was somebody on set who was doing that, and we are talking about a man named Jason Handy. So he was a somebody who was on the set on the Amanda show. By the way, speaking of being on set, yeah, the parents were not allowed on set with their children when they could not be doing that. Jason Handy was actually the one who was ushering them around. Now, Handy began emailing correspondence with a young girl where he was sending pictures of himself doing acts, if you get what I'm saying. Again, I want to be very vague here. I don't want to go into much detail, but he was doing really inappropriate things. Law enforcement actually went to his home after a while in 2003, and they found things that nobody ever should have involving children, and he was arrested. They found around 10,000 images of this stuff and Ziploc bags that he considered tokens of his relationships with these children, and it was a lot. It was, I cannot, my stomach hurt. It was like, again, satanic, oh, monstrous. So he was arrested, but wait, there's more. Brian Peck. He was an actor who was also a dialogue coach who portrayed a character called the Pickle Boy and all of that. Now, this Pickle Boy was this weird weirdo that kept popping up every now and then with like this big tray of a mountain of pickles, and it was just like a weird character that people were like, where did he come from? But he just kept on coming up again and again. So one time they were having a party at Brian Peck's house, right? One of the children who worked on the show goes into one of his rooms that he had, and he finds a painting of a clown. And when he looks very closely, it was a portrait of the serial killer John Wayne Gacy, who we all know by now. Yeah, it turns out Brian Peck and John Wayne Gacy were pen pals. What in the bloody hell is that? Oh my goodness. Anyway, Brian Peck was also doing similar things to children, and he too was arrested. Now the bizarre and unbelievable thing is that so many people wrote letters to him, not to him but to the judge, for them, like character statements for them to release him, and it's unbelievable the amount of letters that were like, oh, lapse of judgment, he was, the temptation. That is sinister, honestly, that people were defending him. But you guys, one of his victims was somebody on the show, none other than Drake Bell from Drake and Josh. And nobody knew this until the documentary. So, you guys, again, this Nickelodeon documentary was explosive. It was so revealing. Now, we kind of knew, I think it's been a few years where this stuff has kind of been like circulating a little bit, but we've never really heard it like so explicitly as we did. And it's disgusting. I feel so bad for the kids that, their childhoods are ruined. I mean, I can't even imagine, but wow, unbelievable courage. I give credit to all the people who were courageous and speaking out against all of this. But yeah, you guys, these were the first 3 episodes. If you guys want me to go into more detail on the other ones, let me know. What did y'all think? Were y'all shocked? Did y'all grow up watching Nickelodeon? Let me know your thoughts. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch y'all next time. You'll have a great one. Bye.